In this video, I'm going to demonstrate Animbot's temp control grab and release feature, which is incredibly helpful for creating flexible and user-friendly constraints in your Maya scene. So I have the scene here. It's like this box that's being pushed around a conveyor belt system. So it's going to be pushed by this object. It's going to then carry over on the treadmill. It's going to be picked up by this fork-looking mechanism here, and then carried over to the treadmill where it's transported to the final platform. So just full disclosure, this is a demo scene from the ZV Parent Master tool, which is another good free script for creating grab and release constraint setups in Maya. However, I don't believe it's been updated in a while, so it wouldn't work with any Maya version using Python 3. But it's still just a nice kind of setup here to demonstrate the grab and release constraint approach. So let's get started. I'm going to select the box first. This is going to be the driven object, sort of like the child in that constraint relationship. And it's also going to be the object that is takes on the temporary control. So I'll go into temp controls, and by default, you'll see simple control and world space. You also have position and orientation, so you can mix these up if you want to. So under simple control, I'm going to go to grab, release, space. So like I said, I could switch this up, and you can do this after the fact as well. After you've created your temporary control, you can change these settings. I'm going to just leave these as they are and click OK. Also, actually, you can create an optional label, so you can name it, you can color code it, and if you have multiple temp controls going on in your scene, this is a really good idea to do that, so everything is readable and organized in your Maya scene. But I don't have any of that going on, so I'm just going to click on OK. I'm going to go to my bookmark here as well. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is look for the contact point between these two objects. And that's going to be frame 26. So on frame 26, I need to make this object the driver of this object. So I'm going to right click on the temp control menu and then go to temp controls panel. This is going to be my UI, and it works really well in terms of just having a very clear visual representation of the setups that you're creating. And you'll also see some things in the timeline that really, again, create a nice visual aid to understand what's happening here. So I could change the position and the orientation in terms of the space that they are set within. They don't need to be the same. So I could unlock this and change that. However, for the grab and release, I find that pretty much in every scenario, it's better to have these locked into the same space. But just to let you know that you can do that. You also have some anim controls down here. So say, for instance, I wanted to change the scale. Let me just select the controller first. I wanted to change the scale of that. I could. And you can also go beyond the extreme of the slider. Continue to grow that. You can change the orientation. You can also change the shape of the controller. So maybe I'll do a rounded square instead. Scale it down a little bit. I could add a child controller to that, and that's going to give you even more flexibility when you want to. When you want to make changes, right? Because now I have sort of a layer set up for the controllers. I could create a parent controller. I could delete the currently selected controller. I can also change the pivot point, so I can edit pivot point, select the controller, go to that. You see this sort of locator, and then I'll just hit my W key to move this over here, or maybe I'll move it here, and then just deselect, and it moves the controller in space and the pivot point itself. And then if you want to reset it back to its original position, just reset pivot. Okay, so those are the main anim controls. Let's take a look again at how we're going to create our setup here. And most of that visual information is going to be within this window here. So I'm going to select what I want to, the object that I want to be the driver. And then I'm just going to simply click on this button, which is the add grab button. So you have the add grab, the add release, the remove grab, and a couple of others here, which we'll talk about later on. Okay, so all I need to do is click on that. And as soon as I do that, it creates that constraint relationship, right? And conveniently, what it also does is it automatically creates a release space for frame 0 to 25, because I didn't have anything there before. So it's done that automatically for me. So there's no connection until we get to 26, and then there's a connection. So that's a really nice automatic feature that comes with this. Okay, so I'm just going to push this forward till we get to around here. And then all I'm going to do is find my next driver, which is probably going to be this sort of roller thing on the conveyor belt, and go to add grab again. And now this is my new driver. It's taken over the driver role from this object, and now that is the driver. So it will continue to move forward based on the position and the rotation of this object. Now, a couple of points to make. In this window, you can see a couple of things. One, we have this empty hand here that is telling us that it's in release space, so there's no connection between the driver and the driven. Why does this say A though? So if we select this object here, you can see that the name of that object is A. So what it's telling us is that A is the driver in our object, and it starts on frame 26, which you can see here. If we select this controller, you can see that's where it's starting in the timeline as well. And then once we change to the new driver, you can see that represented here as well. So if we go somewhere around here, where I think this is here, you can see the name of this object matches the name that's here. Another nice thing, if we click on the control, here is you see it represented in the timeline as well. So we have the release space here with the sort of the empty hand, and then we have this shaded part here where it says A, and remember A is going to be that sort of push object here. And once we get here, we're changing over to the next driver, and you can see that the name of that driver there as well. Okay, let's see, I'm just gonna frame all, or unframe, yeah, and then frame this bookmark. Okay, so now we have our object here moving along the conveyor belt, but remember it's obeying this object here, and as soon as this starts to rotate, the box is going to rotate along with it, right? Because it's being constrained both in terms of translation and rotation by that object. And it's not quite at the end of the conveyor belt yet. So all I need to do to address that is select a new driver and replace the other one. So we have the first conveyor belt driver starting on frame 27, and then on frame 109, the second sort of roller object is taking over as the driver. And now that is enough to push it for the rest of the way. And then once we lose contact here, maybe on this frame, what I'll do is add release. And much like our first release frame range here, all that means is that we no longer have that connection. Right? So as soon as we get to frame 120, then we have a release space again. Okay, let's see. So the fork comes around here. I'm just going to frame this up. And just find where this fork starts to move back. So frame 215, select this fork object and add grab. I mean, it's really this easy, right? So this is what I was saying before. It's very user-friendly. If I didn't want to have, like this grab here, I would just sort of delete it, right? I think they call it something different. Yeah, just remove the grab, but essentially it's deleting that constraint that we've created. So go back to 215 and then I'll add it again. You can also nudge these as well. Using the nudge tool, I could change where the transition points start at. Okay, so now it's coming over here. And this roller starts to pick it up probably around here. So I'll just select this, although I think it's still kind of rotating around. And again, we would inherit any of that rotation. So I'm just going to select this one here, which should be moving straight along the conveyor belt at this point, and then add grab. The only thing that I'm not too keen about is it's always a little hard to find my my current frame when I'm working this. I'm sure I can change the coloring of that, but by default, it can get a little lost in the timeline. Okay, so let's see. So again, because this roller is starting the rotation around the conveyor belt, at this point, the box is going to follow that. All you need to do is select a new driver and then add grab, and then find where this loses contact again, which is right around here. And from there, I'll add release. So just very quickly, we created this setup here. That would otherwise take a lot of creating locators and space switches within the individual objects. We've done that very easily using the grab and release feature inside of Animbot. Another thing in terms of, I mentioned before, flexibility, is the fact that we can take this control here, because there's really no animation on it, and we can animate independently so that the driven object can have an independent animation, even though we have this constraint relationship. So one thing that I want to do though before I do that is just kind of plot in some initial keyframes for this control, because what we might do later on is bake this down, and by baking it, essentially what we're doing is transplanting all of the animation information from our temp control onto our original control, which in this case is actually the box itself, or at least the transform node for that box. So to do that, we actually need some keys on this controller. So I'm just going to set a key here, and then pretty much at all of the transition points for the space switches. And you can tell that by here as well if it gets a little confusing in the timeline. So I know I need to go to frame 47 and then 109, 120, and 215, 288, 347, and then finally 380. I'm just going to limit this timeline to 400 frames. Okay. So yeah, the flexibility thing. So for instance, if I wanted, I could come over here and see what rotation this is. That's, I'm going to go to gimbal so I can see a little bit better. That's going to be the rotate Z. So I'm going to take the rotate Z and I'm going to animate that just to show you that you have that sort of flexibility, right? And again, that's something you wouldn't necessarily be able to do just using out-of-the-box constraints in Maya, unless you created a setup that would support that within the controls of this box itself. But remember, we didn't have any controls at all to start with. So that's a really nice feature. But we don't necessarily need it for this. It doesn't make much sense. So I'm going to delete it. Okay, now another thing to show you is, like I said before, baking this down. So if we this works perfectly fine within the Maya scene. We can render it, it'd be fine. But if we wanted to export and we didn't want those constraints, we wanted to bake the animation onto the actual box, then we have that available to us as well here through these options. And these options at the top as well. So to start at the top, we have bake keys and bake frames. Now, if you bake keys, it's going to bake keys on the current keys that you have. And this is really good for just keeping a clean timeline. The only issue with this is it might not always have an interpolation that is going to be convincing. It might shift the places, from where it's supposed to be. The interpolation, the eases, and all that stuff can be a little tricky to handle. Now you can go into your graph editor and make adjustments and make it work that way, but sometimes it's better to just bake frames if you're looking for precision, if you have a lot of rotations and things going on with the driven object in the scene. So those are your two options there. You also have these down here: toggle and revert, toggle and bake, clear and revert, clear and bake. So toggle, this method here is essentially, it's giving you a preview of what it's going to look like when you either revert or you bake. So revert is just kind of reverting the animation back to its original state. And bake, like I said before, is just taking all of the animation information that we have on our temp control and transplanting that onto the original control. So those, again, are just ways to preview the end result of that without getting rid of the nodes inside your outliner. So if we look in Animbot, you can see that under temp controls we have those constraints with us, right? So once again, the toggle is just going to disable this, but it won't delete it. So if you toggle it back, then you get those constraints back and you can make further adjustments. Same thing with the bake, right? It's going to toggle the results of the bake. It will toggle these constraints, kind of convert them into what it would look like if it was baked, but you can toggle it back on just by clicking on this again, and then you get your actual constraints, the non-destructive constraints, again for further editing. And these are just more permanent, right? So I could clear and revert back to the original state, or I can clear and then bake all of the animation information back to the original controller. Okay, so just so you understand that a little bit. Now I've tested this scene out, and I can tell, and some of this is because you have all of these kind of rotations in here, that it will work better with a bake frames method. So let's take a look at that, because this requires a little bit more work than just baking keys. Whereas again, well, it depends really, because with baking keys, again, you might have to go into the graph editor and start messing around with your interpolation so that it doesn't start to offset for your in-between keys that might not, your in-between frames anyway, that might not be keyed. But yeah, again, we're going to use bake frames for this because I want to show some approaches with this method. So with that selected, I'm going to go in and clear and bake. Okay, now you can see we're essentially, we're working on ones, right? So we have keys on every frame, which is, a bit overwhelming, but it's something that we can scale back on, and that's the nice thing. So you can do a couple of approaches with this. One, I have the feature here enabled, the smart tint keys. So when those keys were all baked, you can see they're green now, so they're breakdown keys, and because they're green, what I could do is right click and go to remove keys, and remove green keys, and that will remove all of the green keys but leave the red keys where they are. Essentially what we get from that is the baked keys result. But we can also do some other things. So like, if I just wanted to arrange in here, but I wanted to keep this key here, right? If I just right click on this and remove green keys, it keeps my main key still there. But you can see like this interpolation is not working, right? So that's an area where we would want to either create some helper keys while we still have the constraint, or maintain the animation on ones in that section, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't come over here, for instance, maybe, and take this section here and either just cut the keys or, again, going to remove green keys. So what you can do is start to edit, start to go through the animation and see where you need more precision and working on ones, and where you can get away with having less keys. So we certainly don't need any keys between any of this, right? So I could again select all of this, even though I have some of my my red keys there. If I right click and go to remove green keys, then okay, I probably don't want to do it past this point. So I just select all of this, right click, remove green keys, right? Then it keeps those red keys in there. And again, we can just go through and edit through that. There's another thing that we can use, and that's going to be the simplify bake keys feature in our slider here. And if you start scaling this to the left, it's going to start removing keys automatically that shouldn't be affecting the animation. So those are like redundant keys or keys that aren't moving a lot. Or static keys anyway. So if I start moving this, it's going to affect the entire timeline, but I can also come in and select just a frame range and use that. Oops. So yeah, that's removed quite a lot. You might want to kind of experiment a little bit, but again, by selecting just smaller frame ranges, it gives you a little bit more control in terms of what it's doing and where you can get away with things. So looks like it's doing something pretty weird there. Let me undo. Yeah, so I'm not sure where it made those changes, but I'm going to come back in here and start again to just scale away at this. Come in here. So it's a little bit more work to get this going if you want a cleaner timeline. I mean, you could probably also just put this on an animation layer and not have it muddying up your timeline. But as you can see here, just by using the simplify feature here, it really starts to strip down the keys in your timeline and only keep the keys that are absolutely necessary. I also have the oh no, I don't have the overshoot on. Okay. So in here, let's see what it's going to do there. We start to simplify these curves. A lot of these are going to be necessary because of the rotations, but you can see it's starting to delete some of those. We go in here. See, we don't have all of these completely on ones. And then you can just kind of keep scaling this back and looking at it and just testing it out to see if it's deleted too many and you have sliding and stuff like that. But you can see as it's going on, we're cleaning up the timeline and kind of working with this automatically. It doesn't require too much thought, just observation. In this example, we'll take another quick look at the grab and release temp control, but this time using the normalized transition feature as well, which enables you to move your driver object after you've made the constraint relationship. And essentially what it does is recalculates the pathway of that new position on the driven object. So I'll show you what I mean by that, but let's start by positioning the ball in the character's hand. I'm just going to select the ball and then shift select kind of a spot in the character's hand here to make an alignment. So maybe like right there, because our pivot point's there. So I'm going to right click on our align tool and go to align object's position. So I'm only aligning the position of the object, not the scale or the rotation. And that's just going to ballpark it into position there in the hand. Okay, so something like that anyway. And with that done, let's click on our temp control menu here. Go to simple control, grab release space, and then click OK. Okay. And again, remember we can make adjustments to the control if we want to. I'm going to go into the temp controls panel, and like I just said, we could change the scale of this, change the orientation of it, change the shape of it, but it's fine as it is, so I'm going to leave it. And we want the constraint to exist from the very first frame. So I'm going to click on the add grab space. And there we go. Now she's just going to toss the ball up and then catch it. So it's a much simpler setup in terms of the grab release transitions. So let's go to about frame 20, I think. Yeah, maybe 21. And then I'll add a release. And it just does this kind of weird skip thing here. It just needs to update. So I'm going to move off the frame and then back onto it. And there we go. That's all fixed. Just going to move the temp controls panel off screen for a second. And because we've made the release space there, now the ball is free from the hand again. I'm just going to take the ball at this point, set a key on the temp control itself. And then I'll move the ball up here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the animation, just again ballparking it to give you a demonstration. And she's going to catch it somewhere around here. And again, I could use the align tool to get it close to position. And then just make the smaller adjustments. Okay, something like that. And with that contact frame, I'm going to select the IK handle again and add grab space. Okay, there we go. So that's more or less it. Let's just do a little bit of work on the animation. So I'm going to kind of speed it out, fast out of here. And then set a key here. Look at our next frame. I'm just going to ease it in a little bit. You could even just use the tweener for that. Something like that, and then I'll go 3 or 4 frames afterwards, set a key, and tween it again. So we have a bit of hang time there, and then around here, I'm still going to have a bit of an ease, so we have more of a fast in to the hand position there. Let's just see what that looks like. Okay, so it's not playing at real time yet, but should cache, and there we go. Something like that. Okay, so now we have the animation, but like I said, if we want to move this driver, which is the hand in this scenario, and have her catch it in a different position, so let's find sort of that contact pose again. So say I want the hand to be, over here for some reason. Now what's going to happen is, wait a minute, actually let me see, let me just undo and see where the actual contact is. Okay, so it's here instead, in frame 43. So I'm just going to move this over. There we go. So what happens is we get this weird jump because we've moved the position of the driver. So we need to update the system and recalculate this pathway. And that's what the normalize transitions button does. So again, just to show you what's happening, see we have this disconnect between 43 and 42 and 43 in terms of our frames. But once we click on the normalize transitions button, that's all been fixed. Okay, and now it's just a matter of working out the actual animation of the hand. And again, you can adjust this as much as you want. I can move it over here instead. And again, we'll end up with something weird, but all I have to do, once again, is just to normalize transitions. We'll update. There you go. So that's basically the point of this additional tutorial, is to demonstrate that feature there, because it is a really good feature for just, again, having flexibility when you're creating these constraint setups.